Speakcies.
Welcome to Origin of Species, episode 143. I'm Steve here with my good friend Scott. Before we get going, like and subscribe to Origin of Species on YouTube and Rumble. Give us a 5-star rating and positive review on Apple Podcasts, and give us your money. Buy our stuff at speakcies.com/store. You can get an array of shirts, mugs, posters, sweatshirts, wall art, all things that we don't purchase except the shirts and sweatshirts. But expand your horizons.
Do we have squirrel covers yet, or is that still pending?
Not yet, but
Okay.
there's a TeePublic after dark area that I'm trying to get them to open. So there's a chance Speakcies brand squirrel covers will be coming out soon. So our theme tonight is the word motel.
Motel.
Motel. We're going to discuss the origin of motel in the world of travel, particularly in the United States in the last century. A couple things. One, before we get going, one of the things I think we take for granted in our modern world is the ability to travel anywhere very easily, and also just how relatively new that is. It's something I think I take a lot of things for granted, and that's one of them, of just the fact that if we stopped right now, I could grab my passport, my wallet, and a credit card, go down to the airport and fly anywhere in the world. The opportunity to travel is unlimited. And just, looking at motels, I've learned a lot about just what's happened in the last 100 years and how much things have changed in rapid pace. And this is a word that's always interesting to me too, because when I know the difference between a motel and a hotel. I do actually now. Before, I always thought of a motel as like a one-story hotel. It's kind of like the way I put it together.
It's funny you say that. That's specifically how I remember my mom explaining the difference to me when I was a kid, because I was like asking, and she said motels are one story.
Yeah, and it's a good back of hand thing to say, because it works. I mean, most of the time it does that.
It shuts the kids up too. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but it's a good way to tell the difference, and it does. It gets the kids quiet, which in a car, when you're going to a motel, probably is something that was good. So when I think of motels, I really don't think of good things, because most motels that I see seem to be dated. There's a lot of when something's kind of run down, it's almost like a neighborhood that's gone bad. When you see a motel, a lot of times, the one-story thing, I think the open court part of it too, that someone can just like walk through a parking lot right up to your door. There's not even a hallway. So one of the things I enjoyed about the journey that I'm going to take us all on today, learning about motels, is I have a different perspective. Now, trust me, I still associate them with murder and drug use, but I have a different perspective going into that.
Couple of things, and tell me to stop if I feel like this is the right time to talk about this, and you tell me if not, because you were talking about the rundown thing. You're talking about you don't think about good things. For me, it's weird. It's two sides of the same coin, because there's something uniquely depressing about a motel pool or something like that. There's the courtyard, the thing you can walk up, but I have these good memories of road trips with my parents where we were gonna, you knew you were gonna be stopping at a Night's Inn or Motel 6, or if you were lucky, a Red Roof Inn. Like, to me, I thought Red Roof Inn was like the cream of the crop. Like, I thought that was like the best. No, I thought Holiday Inn was the best hotel you could go to, but we didn't go there. We went to Red Roof Inn, but I would go to the pool no matter what. I didn't, as a kid. Like, now I look at the pool, I wouldn't let my kids go in these pools. But when I was a kid, if there was a body of water, I used to sit in puddles when I was a kid. As a little kid, you'd sit in the street in puddles. Did you do that?
I was about to say the same thing. I was like, if it was any pool of water, whether in a creepy motel swimming pool or a giant puddle, it was water. You played in it.
I remember, just to show that I'm not I don't know why I would make up that I played in puddles, but I remember how you'd sit in the puddles in the street, and there'd be like a sheen of oil on top because it was coming up out of the street. I mean, as soon as it started raining, get in that puddle. So a Motel 6 pool was pretty sweet. If it was open, I don't care if it was freezing outside, I was getting in the pool. So it is, you think back, and it's kind of dirty. Now here's the flip side. maybe you'll get to this.
Mm-hmm.
Have you stayed in a motel in like the last 10 or 15 years? Because all of the good associations are gone and it just is the dirty, gross motel for the most part. Maybe there's some good ones, but the ones I went like a Dirty Days Inn in Charlottesville, and I haven't been back. Now, I don't even know if you would count a Days Inn as a motel. Maybe we'll find out. But anyway, I'll wrap up and let you go on. But a lot of disappointments when, we're going to stop at this hotel. There's going to be a game room. So the whole trip, 7 hours, you're in a minivan waiting for the game room, and it turns out to be a broken little pinball machine or something. So I have a lot of baggage with.
Well, we're going to help you with that. We're going to take your baggage and put it in a car and travel somewhere with it. So one of the things that we'll talk about is motels and why there is a reason why they seem dated and of a relic of the past, because they are. And also the difference between motels and hotels. And we'll talk about too, as we kind of go through the history of motels, how some things happened as last century went on, that brought about Holiday Inn and some other institutions. So I think we'll help you with your baggage here.
Great.
First, to our first destination, the word motel. So from etymonline.com, motel originates from the year 1925. It's a combination of the word motor and hotel, essentially a motor hotel made, designated or created specifically for automobile travelers. When you do some research online, you'll find a couple places where somebody by the name of Oscar T. Tomlinson claims to have created the word in 1930.
Didn't he win the Heisman?
He didn't. I think one of his descendants did, but it's one of those things that it's almost like that when I told my brother that we invented Doritos, our family did.
One of my favorite things.
Kind of like a lie that stuck for a bit. Not true. The origin of the term comes back to the year 1925 in the Milestone Interstate Corporation, in a chain of motor hotels they were going to open between San Diego and Seattle. And the name of it would be Motel. And a lot of times it was hyphened to show the combination of the two.
So Motel was actually a brand name when they came up with this, essentially. Or no?
No, actually it was. I think it's a good way. That's actually a very good point. They tried to trademark it, but ended up not being able to, because they did originate the term, but they weren't able to eventually trademark that word.
Okay.
So it was close, but they also had the very first motel, which parts of it still exist in San Luis Obispo, California. And I'm pretty sure I pronounced every word with a different accent, which was pretty impressive, I think, on my part. My brain-to-mouth dyslexia, or whatever it is that I do, just went up another notch. So motels basically were started, were hotels designated for automobile travelers. And to talk a little bit about how we got to a point of motels starting, I'm going to rely on two articles pretty heavily. The Rise and Fall of the Great American Motel by Andrew Wood, from June 2017 from SmithsonianMag.com. And also an article from Medium.com called The Bizarre History of America's Motels. Another bizarre thing about this article is there's no author attributed to it. It seems to be just one of those articles that emerged. But we will quote from them also. So leading up to 1925 and the years before, travel in the United States became a little bit easier with the invention of the automobile. So as with a lot of things that seem to happen, a new technology will come in and start driving innovation and change. So originally when cars were invented, travel was pretty limited. If you were going to go somewhere, you could maybe take a train, but that would be for a long distance. And obviously, horses and buggies were still around, which had to be a very interesting time to be in that transition. Because there was a guy that was like a horse guy. It was like everyone's all into these newfangled automobiles.
He was holding strong on the horse.
Yeah,
he's like, it's a fad, this automobile thing.
It's gonna go the way of the dodo.
Right.
So leading up to that, the infrastructure in the United States was pretty limited. You had railways across the United States, but roads were pretty hard to come by. I read a statistic in my research in the year 1904, only 4% of roads were paved in the United States.
Oh, wow.
So,
What year was that?
1904.
Okay.
So not a lot of options there if you're going to be driving around. So with that kind of as the basis, we see with automobiles arriving, we start to see an infrastructure spread around that. And it was the need for people to be able to stay places as they drove.
Right, because otherwise, I like to envision somebody in a Model T or a whatever those early cars were, just like pull over the side of the road and pitch a tent,
Well, you know what people did when they started out?
What?
Literally that. They would
Yeah.
drive over to the side of the road and pitch a tent.
Yeah.
So as that was what started, what's also often described as the tourist trend, because people would tour around in their cars. So as people saw automobile travelers making tents and pitching tents on the side of the road, industry started to pick up for that. So the first were camps and cabins. People would build log cabins on the side of the road, and I think I'm using the term log generously. It'd be some sort of cabin. People would put up tents or teepees and just give people a place to stay.
I mean, America's awesome. Yeah. When I'm listening to you now, I'm thinking I'm having nostalgia now for obviously, like you said, innovation still happens and we can do it, but now it's a lot more virtual. There's not as much real estate, I guess. The idea of this is so cool. Imagine living in America and being able to just go, you know what? I'm going to build a cabin, charge somebody a nickel, and they can stay for a week or whatever it is. And my wife will make some bread, and it's pretty cool.
It is. It's amazing what happened. And it also is another indication of, just a thought I always have of what people that were born early in the 20th century saw. If you were born in, 1925, when the first motel was invented, what you would see by the time you passed away 80 years later.
I didn't want to be a bummer. I was going to bring this up. My grandmother passed last year, and she was, I think, 97. And I just remember I was sitting there talking to my dad going like, she saw the invention of like air conditioning, like the radio, cars were new. She went through the Depression. She saw both war. I mean, it's really unbelievable when you think about everything. And just if you just take the inventions, it's insane.
It is. It's incredible what people got to see. And I think it also goes back into our little bit of being spoiled, that there's been all these great innovations that there's not too much more to go. Sometimes I feel like
that's how it feels.
And also too, just because we live in such luxury, I think we forget that, not very long ago, within generations of people that we've had contact with, these things didn't exist.
Well, and it is weird though. I think you and I may have talked about this before, maybe not on the podcast, but how I sit here, like I said, there's not as much stuff to innovate anymore, but it's just because, you have no concept of what it could be. And you think back, it's like, did my grandmother think once the radio is out, it's like, well, what are you going to do now? I mean, or once the telephone is out, you can pick up a phone and talk to somebody on the other side of the country. Like, what else are we going to do? We're done.
Yeah. So hopefully there's some new things. I still want my jetpack, and I want to see somebody land on Mars. So we still have a couple of things to shoot for.
Absolutely.
So on the way to Mars, we'll continue with how the automobile changed the United States. So with that, the need for increased roads began, and you started to see your first highways. Roads were created. I know here we're in Richmond, Virginia. Route 1 goes up and down the eastern corridor of the United States. Not an interstate. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but a highway, that you could travel. And you'll see a lot of motels on like kind of classic highways, your Route 66s, your Route 1s. You'll see a lot of hotels there because as roads were developed, people moved from having their roadside cabins or just whatever random road it was, but would begin to set an infrastructure up. Also, gas stations started to show up along these roads too.
All those gas stations that are in horror movies.
Yeah.
Got
built and all the motels that eventually end up in horror movies too.
Now, I need to ask a dumb question, and I don't expect you to have an answer for this, so don't worry. But we've got highways. Do we need byways? They talk about the highways and byways. Anyone know what a byway is? And do we need a byway? Is it just
I
another
think
word for
that is a
byway?
great question. And to be honest with you, I started digging into the birth of the Federal Interstate system, and we'll talk about that a
Wow.
little bit here later. But there's a whole episode in that. There's maybe a whole series in that of just like
Yeah.
the growth of roads and the things that were associated with that. So we'll touch on that a little bit with this.
Sounds like a early Roman Polanski movie would be built around something like that.
I like you're an ideas man. That's one of the many reasons I love doing
What's
this.
he been up to recently? I
Yeah.
haven't heard too much.
He's hopefully not in Jack Nicholson's hot tub anymore. So as motels started to expand and grow, they also adapted some of the early, I think, features that we would see. They tried to style themselves as more of like roadside resorts, as I've seen it described, and found a way to kind of bring people in. So you would see a lot of themes, and this is from my medium.com article that I read, especially after World War II. You would see things that were tiki themed after soldiers came back from the Pacific and had seen, the Hawaiian Islands and such. The article from Medium, I'm going to quote from there. Motel owners built huge, culturally insensitive depictions of Polynesian gods that loomed over pools and restaurant buffets.
They were just, sorry. I was going to say they were just awesome until 5 years ago. Now they're culturally
They were.
insensitive.
And that's why I wanted to call out this guy. One of the reasons I wanted to use this article was to call out his, the mysterious author's very good use of an opportunity to virtue signal, and also gives me a chance to plug one of our new shirts available at speakcies.com/store, the all-purpose virtual signaling shirt. No matter what you're for or against, things are always changing. This shirt will cover you, that no matter what the trend is, if it's masks, if it's voting plans, if it's the vid, if it's standing up for Ukraine, if it's being mad at Ukraine down the road, who knows? This shirt will have you covered. So thank you, medium.com, for virtue signaling and pointing out how culturally insensitive the depictions of Polynesian gods were.
I'm starting to wonder if, first of all, Steve, you may have outdone yourself with the shirt. It's created quite the buzz. It's a great shirt. And that's the beauty of it, is it keeps you covered. We don't know what's coming around the bend and what's coming down the highway.
No.
But I'm starting to wonder if this Medium article, or just Medium in general, just grew organically from the internet. Like it just took the seedlings from, Vox and Jezebel and all that, and just grew into these articles, just grew. There's actually no author, but I've been thinking a lot of weird things about.
I've been thinking that too. It just seems to always be, you've talked about before, you find something that's a real article, but then you'll find 6 versions of the same article that are slightly different.
Yeah. Well, I think I'll get off the topic because I talk about it every show, but something's going on, because there aren't that many people are too lazy. People aren't writing all these articles. They're getting generated. They have to be, or it's a bunch of plagiarism, which, cut and paste and change a couple adjectives, but just make sure you leave insensitive in there, or cultural appropriation, or racist.
Yeah.
And your goal.
Oh, when in doubt, it's racist. So you don't have to worry about that. I mean, you could just reprint every article and just stick it's racist at the front.
But if you buy the t-shirt, you don't have to worry about it, because everyone knows. Yeah. You stand with whatever's going on that you should be standing with.
I like that. So one of the things about motels that is very big in the history of this of this trend is the creation of the Federal Interstate System in 1956. So I'm going to talk about that more in just a little bit. But to sum up, the origin of Motel. Motel comes from 1925. Originates with the Motel Inn, originally known as the Milestone Motel with a dash. That was from the Milestone Interstate Corporation. And Oscar T. Tomlinson, you had some good running backs in your family, but you did not create that term.
Very nice.
So, Scott, before I discuss the effects of the 1956 Federal Interstate Act, you have something you wanted to share with us.
I do. I have a segment coming up that I'm very excited to share with you guys. Please stick around. I promise it will be worth it. But I also was thinking today about a few things, and I thought about how we are very tongue-in-cheek on this podcast, and don't get serious too often. But I decided I wanted to give a little bit of advice to, I'm about to turn 44. Steve's approaching his early 40s. We are getting a little older, and I feel like I have some advice to dispense. And so I wanted to start with this, and I thought about making a whole new segment, and then I realized I got to stop making a segment every time I just want to talk about something. So, advice for you younger people: don't claim to be old too soon, because you're always going to have time to be old. When I was 28, I thought I was older than I am right now. Like I felt like my life, like, not my life was over. Okay, that's depressing, but I felt like I'm officially old. Anything I wanted to do, the time has passed. Then when I was in my 30s, I was like, oh shoot, I could have done anything in my 20s. Now I'm in my 30s. It's too late. I'm old. Well, getting ready to turn 44. Now, I don't feel as old probably as I did back then, but I am definitely getting older. And I want to just share some of the signs that come with that. So if you're experiencing some of these signs, you might be getting older. And I do feel like this is a Jeff Foxworthy ripoff. But over the last few days, first of all, Steve and I talk on the phone pretty often. And we generally talk about who knows what, the podcast, whatever scuttlebutt we want to discuss. And but recently there's been a topic that's pretty much been dominating almost every conversation, and that's been grass. Grass has come up a lot, and it's to the point where I have to check in and say, Steve, are you okay with me still talking about my grass? And you're like, please.
Yes. And I wish we did video calls for that, because you would see my eyes bulge out of my head with delight of like, yes, please keep talking about grass. Anything you can do to keep that subject going.
That's right. And then you start talking about flooring and contractors, and I start talking about my deck, and next thing you know, 45 minutes has passed, and you're just happy. And again, there's the check-in of like, am I going on? No. Give me more. That's a sign that you might be getting old, for one. But young guys can work on their house, and it's not necessarily. The other one that I'll give you, I only have one more. I think this one's a little more concrete. I spontaneously bought a sensible pair of New Balance last week. And like, just because I wanted a really comfortable shoe.
Yeah.
Now, I didn't go white New Balance, but more for practical reasons, which was the store I was at didn't have white. And, there's the whole situation where the grass gets on it, but that's kind of nice. I mean, Steve, where are you with, I know you've had dad shoes for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, I am a few years older than you. So if you say anything that's incorrect, I will gently find a way to correct you. But a few years ago, I did understand the benefit of sensible shoes, and the fact that every pair of athletic shoes I buy also coincides with a trip to REI to get the special insert I need for my arches that I have to have with every shoe that I own. And if anything's just a regular around the house shoe, there's a Dr. Scholl's gel insole in there also. So something about, as a kid who ran around outside in bare feet and did wore flip flops 90% of the year, that's not happening anymore. You got to take care of your feet.
Absolutely. And like, I really am don't care what they look like, because I've got some Vans that I got a few years ago. I can't wear those. I got some boots. And it's just, they're uncomfortable. So I will be wearing New Balance to concerts, to whatever I do, whatever. I'm embracing that part of my oldness. And I did also look for inserts at this place, and I couldn't find what I wanted. So I'm approaching where you are, and I'm not making that up. I really was. Like, my feet. But these are good. And they also have toe protection, which I don't even know exactly what they're doing to protect the toe, but I said, please protect my toe. By all means, New Balance. I trust you.
I wasn't aware of that. See, this is another good old man discussion. Next time we talk about our grass seed choices, we're going to discuss toe protection options, because there goes the rest of my night when we're done. I will be researching that.
I seriously think I have just gone, I just stare at my dirt now. I go outside to the backyard, I stare at the dirt. And I sent you a picture, like a close up when the grass was first starting to germinate. And like, we had a moment, like, cause so that's getting old. And by the way, remember when you said you wish there was a video call of our phone calls? I think we're kind of giving a taste. So before we lose our audience, that's under 40.
Yeah.
I do want to get to my segment, which I am excited about, but a couple more quick little pieces of advice, as this is Uncle Scott's, advice corner here for a second. And I mean all of these. None of these are tongue in cheek. They're things that I wish somebody had told me a while ago. I was inspired by listening to Barry Weiss's podcast, and she had a guy on. Don't remember actually who he was, but he was really smart, really good guy. At the end, she said, "Do you have any advice for people?" And he said, "Don't buy long grain white rice, buy jasmine rice." And I was like, interesting. And I switched to jasmine rice, and it's way better. And he was right. But that's his advice. Here's my advice.
Yes.
Number one, always brine your chicken or pork. Every time. Just do it. Trust me. Number two, nobody cares about the things that you're self-conscious about. Nobody cares. They're self-conscious as well. Number three, never tell somebody's secret. And definitely don't say, "I'm going to tell you this, but you have to promise not to tell anybody else." Because, and I think Steve, you'll back me up, there is a 100% chance they're going to tell somebody else. Don't tell other people's secrets. And really, you shouldn't tell your own unless you really know that the person is going to abide by that rule. And then number four, never go full vegan. And on that note, Origin of Eatcies is back.
Bacon?
No, I want my bacon. I gotta tell you something. Bacon is good for me.
It was a strong ending, by the way. I think that there's some movement. I'm gonna also go overseed my lawn again when we're done with this, even if it's in the dark.
And I know that you are, because we talked about it earlier today. That's not a joke. Man, I've been trying to chase the high of the McRib, Dr. Roger Mandingo situation. I said we probably won't do another Origin of Eatcies because I usually do one segment of something and then get bored or don't think it's good. But I think I have found one that is worthy to be in the same discussion as Dr. Roger Mandingo, which is saying a lot.
It's saying a whole lot there. So you've set a high bar in a good way, though, but you've set a very high standard for this segment. So I trust you.
You got to get the listener in. And once they've gotten past this part, if they don't agree, well, we'll see. Send us your letters. We do get your letters. We have a PO box. We get your handwritten mail. I have been told I need to stop touching my mustache throughout the show, and I'm doing my best to not do that. So today we're going to talk about corn flakes, Kellogg's corn flakes. I've had them. Like, I had them growing up. I didn't eat sugar cereal growing up. We weren't allowed to have any sugar cereal. And to the point where I'd go to somebody's house and they'd have sugar cereal, and I didn't like it because it was so great. It was way too sweet. My parents didn't put sugar. Like, when we had lemonade, like the country time, it was like a quarter cup of sugar. Like, everything we had was not sweet for whatever reason until we got Coke, and then, which was like the sweetest thing you'd have. Anyway, I liked corn flakes. I don't know if you guys had better cereal for sure.
We were a sugared cereal family. I was a cereal connoisseur back in the day. The deal was, Mom would buy us one box of sugared cereal that my brother and I had to split. Once that was done, we had to eat the rest of the stuff. So it would be done. If she bought it on Friday, it was finished Saturday, probably. I mean, we would go to town on it. But the downside of that was, whenever it was left over, including maybe cornflakes that we had, we would find sugar in the house and basically recreate. Like, we would make our own frosted flakes if we had cornflakes. We were picked.
Well, no, people did that. I spent the night at a kid's house when I was in like 3rd or 4th grade, and his mom dumped out some, I think, Wheaties or cornflakes or something, and just, shook a bunch of sugar over it. And I took one bite and was like, but because I was me, I had to eat it. I was like, forced myself to eat it so that I wasn't being rude. But anyway, cornflakes, I actually really liked them. They probably tasted gross to you, like you said, unless you put some sugar on it. But where'd they come from? Obviously, if I'm going to compare it to Dr. Roger Mandingo and the McRib, it's going to have a good backstory, and I think it does. So I want to just touch on fad diets for a minute. So fad diets are everywhere. They have been, and I guess it's something that, it's interesting. The more you look back in history, the more you see that a lot of similarities, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It is the same sort of hustle that's going on. Not always a hustle, but people are people. even back in the 1850s. So back in so there were a lot of fad diets going on. Now I'm going to tell you about an interesting fad diet, so to speak, that happened back in the 1850s. Back in the 1850s, breakfast was amazing. Okay. Do you know what they used to eat? Like, this is if you could get your hands on it. So if you're affluent at all, this is what you're eating at 18. This is real. This is in,
I believe
it's everywhere. You'd have breads, pastries, pancakes, fritters, boiled chickens, cold cuts, and beef steaks. It was a huge meal of mostly meat and carbs and bread and everything else. Big deal. So guess what? There was an epidemic, if you will, of indigestion in America. And it's kind of, okay, indigestion. But in the 1850s, like, this was a big deal. It was written about. It's compared to the obesity crisis that we have now. That's how much people were talking about, what are we going to do about this indigestion, in this day and age. So you had this movement that came along to deal with this thing that they called dyspepsia, which was what they called the I guess, chronic indigestion that came from meats. And so there was a movement that came along where they said, let's try to get people eating more, what the way they put it was simpler foods. And so a big player in that, well, it was two of them, and it was the Kellogg. So Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, which doesn't compete with our boy, I'm not trying to go there, but Dr. John Harvey Kellogg was a big proponent of bland foods like cereal. So and I got this from Forbes.com, by the way, and that's important in a minute. I'll tell you why. But writing of America's tendency to eat with, quote, the feeble stomach of a primate, seemingly every kind of food, including new, quote, artificial foods, he concluded that it is no wonder that the human gastric machine has broken down, and that dyspepsia, constipation, and peristaltic woes of various description have become universal in civilized lands. So he had a movement, or, I won't call it a fad diet, but he called it biological living, and which called for more exercise. Fantastic. More bathing. Let's go. Eating whole grains and less meat. I think that's actually not factual that's good for you. But it was still, I don't think anybody knows. I'll be honest with you. I don't think anybody freaking knows what's healthy now. I don't think they knew then. But what's the same is he touted this thing. He called it biological living. And it was supposed to be like a return to basics. So kind of like with paleo and things, I'm going to only eat whole vegetables or whatever it is. There's this thing of like, let's get away from the stuff that's processed, like the McRib. And there's a little bit of we're better than you and all that as well. But have you ever noticed, actually, it's funny because you and I had talked about the other day, I said, we were talking about chiropractors, and I don't want to, ruffle any feathers. I'll use a chiropractor, but they can do stuff to your back. But every time it goes into the word holistic, I kind of glaze over because I'm like, all right, what are you trying to upsell me on? What powder do I need to drink? Well, he described it as holistic living. So he was one of the first ones. So I'm going to tell you where cornflakes came from. And then I'm going to tell you where the kind of the good stuff like bathing and the biological stuff sort of got weird. Cornflakes, like many of the things that we eat and drink today, was invented on accident. In 1894, William Kellogg, who was the brother of Dr. Kellogg, Dr. James Kellogg, John Harvey Kellogg, was boiling wheat. He wanted to make dough. He let the dough sit out too long. He tried to roll it. It wouldn't roll, but he found that the what they call the wheat berry would flatten. And so he said, oh, let me just put this in the oven. He baked it and you had cornflakes. Okay. So cornflakes came about and they decided, and by the way, Dr. John Kellogg was very religious. He was in the Seventh-day Adventist church. He did not care. And I actually kind of believe from everything I read, he did not care about the business. He did not care about making money. It was all, all
about clean living,
holistic. But like I said, this is where things got a little weird. So William Kellogg, his brother, was like, no, we're going to sell this and we're going to make a buttload of money. So let me read. So the twist is, I've been teasing it for the whole show. One of the biggest reasons that he was promoting the return to simple foods was that he was in bland foods, was to quell the scourge of masturbation. Yeah.
What were they doing with that meat? Maybe that's why they were having indigestion. I can think of if they're finding creative ways for sauces. I'm sorry. This is your segment. Please continue.
Hey, well, we did have the meat that got brought into play in the history of Valentine's Day. I mean, who knows? We're as he put, what do you say? We're primates or something. But
yeah,
no, the thought, and well, let me just read it from the words of Dr. John Kellogg. He said, unlike today's food trends, the article in Forbes says, unlike today's food trends, Dr. Kellogg also believed that man's modern diets led them to carnal sins. And this is his quote: high seasoned meats, stimulating sauces, and dainty tidbits in endless variety irritate the nerves and react upon the sexual organs. So he wrote about the dangers of sex and masturbation and how this food would promote healthy living. Cereal was the bridge to keep Americans diet to where they would not be tempted to create it wouldn't lead them to sin. Their diet wouldn't lead them to sin. And by the way, good call on the sauces. I'd forgotten about that, but he did call that out specifically.
Okay. So, and if you don't know this, I don't want to put you on the spot.
No.
So was there like indigestion sounds like that was a nationally acknowledged problem. Was baitin like a big problem back then? Like, was that discussed also?
Yeah. I mean, they thought so.
Okay. I mean, Dr. Kellogg did, but I just didn't know if it was like,
I didn't find anything in any of the articles I read that said, it was known back in the late 1800s, early 1900s that it was like known as the like masturbatory era.
Everyone's baiting back then.
Everyone's
to what?
Baiting.
Who knows?
Baitin with bacon, the new podcast on Speakcies. But yeah, bottom line was he was just very pious or whatever, and said
probably speculated that everyone was.
Well, he sounds a little nuts. I mean, I think all these people that it's so weird when you look back in history, and it still happens today. Like I said, there's good stuff. There's stuff that you look at and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. But then it always goes a little too far, and you're like, wait, what'd you just say? So,
well, I mean, the anti-meat talk. Obviously, the guy is mentally disturbed and completely wrong, and probably a devil worshiper. But I'm sorry, please continue.
And this is for real. And this is what I thought you were kind of going to ask, which I did try to figure out. I don't understand his point about like meat not being a simple food. I could understand if it was like Vienna sausage or like McRibs, but
yeah,
people were just eating meat, and I don't. So that didn't make sense to me on like why cornflakes are somehow simpler than bacon, but this guy did, and his brother. If his brother hadn't marketed it and gotten it out there, we wouldn't be talking about it right now. And we'd all probably be less fat.
We all know cornflakes.
And honestly, like I said, who knows what actually is healthy and what isn't in this world. And please, actually, if anybody has an opinion on that, please keep it to yourself. But let's move on. I need to point something out that's very important, because we do take pride in debunking. It's about 50-50 on articles out there that claim that this is not true, that claim that masturbation had nothing to do with it. I don't believe it. I actually think it's true. And here's why. A couple of the articles I found were on domains. They're on Seventh-day Adventist websites. Okay. So that's your first clue. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, I think people are trying to first of all, everyone's always trying to churn out content, and like you put the word masturbation in there, like it's just as clickbaity to say cornflakes were not caused by people trying to stop masturbation.
Right.
And they're actually right. That wasn't even really the primary reason necessarily he did it, but it was a driving factor. Also, like I said, I mean, this was in Forbes. They quote him directly. Like he said those words. So I'm going to wrap here because I've gone a little long, but I do want to also mention, because I did say I want to get a couple decent names in here, or things that you might recognize. And looking at them now, they're actually not that great, but I will share. There were more people in this anti-masturbation movement. And one of the guys' names was James Caleb Jackson. And he created the very first cereal called Granula, which nobody liked. And it was so hard that it would like break people's teeth. And maybe that's a way to stop masturbation.
Yeah.
You're just so
Your
uncomfortable.
gums are throbbing. Nothing else will be throbbing on you.
Right. Yes, as my old grandpappy used to say. The other one was a gentleman by the name of Sylvester Graham. And if the name Graham rings a bell, if you go open your cupboard, you may find some graham crackers. And it was Sylvester Graham who was also trying to fight the scourge of rampant masturbation, and thought that graham crackers would tame the, wouldn't have the same impact on the sexual organs. Essentially what these are is like anti-aphrodisiacs. That's what they were essentially claiming. Okay. I guess.
I could see that if meat being an aphrodisiac of, having meat and being a virile man because you eat meat like you should. Maybe it is. I see I believe that this was all anti-baitin food, but I also see some sinister undertones here from vegetarians.
And well, all I can say is it's backfiring, because you're telling me I eat more meat and get more virile, like you said.
Yeah,
that's what I call a big win. All right, well, there you have it. I don't know if it quite lived up to the McRib, but I enjoyed researching this one, and that was Origin of Eatcies, Volume 2.
Bacon?
No, I want my bacon. I gotta tell you something. Bacon is good for me.
I'm intrigued. The next time I have some cereal, I'm gonna,
go a week on just cereal
and see what else, monitor my internet usage afterwards. Something like that. We'll see. There's something there. There's some testing here.
Yeah.
That we'll do.
You can mix it up and have a graham cracker. Treat yourself.
Yeah. Live it up with a graham cracker there. So speaking of living it up, people up to the late 50s were going to motels. If you needed to travel and stay somewhere, motels were made to cater to motor travelers using the major highways of the time. Your Route 1s, your Route 66s, routes or routes, depending where you're from, Belgian, Mongolian, say, route most of the time. And that changed in 1956. And in 1956, Dwight Eisenhower helped pass the Federal Interstate Act. And what this did is created major interstates across the United States to connect the country. I've always heard kind of that this was one to help connect the country so people could travel, but also in case there was a military situation, that heavy equipment could be moved quickly. Not sure how true. I actually didn't see that in any of the research I did today on that. And part of that was I had to pull myself out because it was a big rabbit hole.
Yeah.
But, so a lot of motels were built along the highways at the time, but they were soon superseded by the interstates that would bypass those roads. In some cases run parallel with them. I talked about Route 1 and Interstate 95 kind of running parallel to each other. So you see sometimes they would follow the same path, but at the same time, if you're driving on a highway, you just can turn into the parking lot. If you're on the interstate, there's got to be a designated exit. So in the same way that we saw, infrastructure build up with the original motels, we started to see a different thing build up around the interstate system.
I just had a moment. I'm sorry, I keep jumping in.
No.
Just today, bringing home my daughter from school, and we had the windows open. No, it was last night because it was a nice clear night. I had the windows and the moonroof open, or sunroof, I guess, because it opens all the way. And it's windy and stuff. And I say, well, as soon as we get on the highway, I'm going to shut this because it's going to be too much wind, as we're getting ready to get on exit. And she's like, isn't this a highway? She's like, what makes a highway? And so I was going to say, man, I'm going to have her listen to this episode. But then I just realized I spent 25 minutes saying masturbation. So I will not be sending her to this episode, but it is kind of a coincidence that just came up last night.
We'll see. We'll see if I can find some other maybe non-cornflakes articles I can send to her.
Okay, perfect.
So as I started out, one of the things that kind of blew my mind reading this was just things we take for granted. That the interstate system started being constructed in 1956. It's barely 60 years old.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it's something we take for granted that, we talk, if I wanted to go to the airport to fly to another country, I can get in my car, get on the interstate and get there in 10 minutes and be on a plane heading out of here. So one of the reasons that you see a lot of motels that are kind of dated or seem to be in disrepair is they became obsolete. They were built along certain roads that went away. They're still highly traveled roads, but nowhere near the amount of traffic that an interstate would provide. If you're going to go to Florida from Richmond, you're not going to take Route 1 all the way down. You could, but it's not the most efficient way to travel.
That's fascinating. That's a very interesting. Okay.
So in the late 50s, I want to talk about two technically started as motels and became hotels, but I think they kind of give some insight into the past life of motels, but also the future and just some interesting things that arose from that. So the first is Holiday Inn. And you mentioned Holiday Inn earlier. So Holiday Inn was founded by a gentleman by the name of Charles Kemmons Wilson. He generally went by Kemmons Wilson. And he was inspired to create the Holiday Inn after a frustrating family vacation in 1951. So I'm quoting from his family's website, kwilson.com. The idea of Holiday Inns was born from a frustrated father on a family vacation. In 1951, Dorothy, his wife, finally persuaded Kemmons to take a break, so they packed up the children, all 5 of them, and headed to Washington, D.C. to visit national monuments. By the time they reached their destination, Kemmons had formulated an idea born from the discomforts he had encountered as he and his family trekked across the land. And he gives a list of things that he had to deal with, including being charged for every child that was in the car, really bad dated accommodations. And I can almost see this too, that if you're in a pre-interstate time and you're driving, you're almost held hostage a little bit. There's only so far you can go. And if someone decides to pull some shenanigans on you, what are you going to do? If you show up and, it's now an extra whatever for every kid that you're going to have. It'd be pretty frustrating. So after this trip, this inspired him to start his own motel, which became Holiday Inn. And Kemmons Wilson was a trailblazer. I know sometimes that kind of gets thrown around about people who make changes. When he started Holiday Inn, he developed a lot of things that are standard for the industry still today. Things we take, other things we take for granted. Standardized room size. Every Holiday Inn you went to has the same size. Swimming pool. Telephones, ice machines, a restaurant, and no charge for children under 12 who stayed there.
Smart.
And also, too, he started this, I believe, right before 1956. So he also did a really good job of timing when the interstate system was going to develop. And I think one of the things that impresses me about him, other than the timing, was the benefit. One of the things I like about hotels. There's certain things I don't like to have that are chain themed. Like I like to go, if a new restaurant opens in town, I'm not intrigued if it's this national chain has a new restaurant here.
Right.
That doesn't do much for me. But like I want to go to a restaurant that's, privately owned and something that's new and innovative. I'm the exact opposite with somewhere to stay.
Wow. That's such an interesting point. You're right. Yeah.
If I go somewhere, I want to know what I'm getting into. And I actually like hotels for that still to this day of like, that's some of the reasons I've started doing more Airbnbs, but at the same time with a hotel, I know exactly what I'm getting into. When I say a Holiday Inn sign, I know what I'm getting into. And they had that famous sign for years that actually was a really big, personal problem for Kemmons when they removed it, that the standard Holiday Inn sign that you don't see anymore, but you would know if you Google Holiday Inn,
I can picture it.
You can picture it in your head.
Yep.
When they got rid of that, he was furious. He actually on his tombstone has a replica of that.
Wow. That's a level of spitefulness that you got to admire.
Well, I appreciate spitefulness in people. And to me, I hold it as a virtue. He's somebody that just the initial reading I've done about this guy is just somebody that comes across to me as a good person.
Yeah.
He has a smile. I saw a picture of him and his wife that from a distance, I was like, who's that young man with that older lady? And he had just such a boyish smile that he just seemed like a very sincere person. Now, I don't know if somebody is listening to this right now and knows where he buried all the bodies. I don't think so. But he seems to be me. Maybe that's what the
never saw him in the same place.
Yeah. So, and just a couple other things, other innovations that he did. He created a partnership with Gulf Oil that anyone with a Gulf Oil credit card could stay at a Holiday Inn and receive a discount. He also created the first central reservation system for the hospitality industry. So a big innovator.
What an innovator. Yeah, this guy.
Yeah. So combined with, I think, rightfully diagnosing some of the problems with motels, the inconsistencies, the fees that were kind of out of the non-standardness, I guess, of it. He was able to innovate the industry, and unfortunately for motel owners, probably put another nail in that coffin for that industry. But pretty interesting guy.
Yeah, no, and the spitefulness thing. No, it'd be one thing if he had that sign and then said something like "Up yours, Howard Johnson," but it sounds like he was just proud of his sign. So
yeah,
it sounds actually like a really interesting guy. A guy I'd like to read a biography on, actually.
Yeah, and related, this is not going to sound like somebody you'd be very interested in. But when I think of travel and I think of motels, there's another place I think of. And if anyone has ever traveled on the East Coast, you're probably familiar with this establishment. South of the border.
Pedro is waiting.
That's right. Now, when I say south of the border, Scott, what do you think?
Well, if I hear south of the border, because I think out loud, the first thing I think is Pedro is waiting. I think of the big billboards driving down, I guess, what would it be? 95?
Yeah, driving down 95.
Yeah, just every few miles, hyping you up for whatever's there.
Yeah, taunting you with those signs. I remember being a kid, just those signs were getting me fired up and had to probably drive my parents out of their mind. That the only revenge I think that they had, which was appropriate, when we finally stopped at the south of the border. I don't know if you've ever been there.
No,
it is very. You'll be all right. It is extremely underwhelming.
Was Pedro waiting?
Pedro was not waiting, or was he? So we'll talk a little bit about that. So quoting heavily from an article from 2017 by Libby Weisarima, how South Carolina's famous south of the border still survives in modern times. In 1949, the people of Robeson County, North Carolina, were facing the unpleasant realities of the county's prohibition on booze sales. So Alan Schaefer, owner of Schaefer Distributing and a beer wholesaler just over the state line, erected a pink cinder block stand in Hamer, South Carolina, and named it South of the Border Beer Depot, later changed to South of the Border when he added a motel.
Okay, that's very interesting.
So it starts there, and then with that name, and a lot of hiring of Mexican employees.
I was about to say, at that point, there was no play on words there with the name. It was south of the border of North Carolina. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And then with that, the Mexican theme began to ramp up after he went to a business trip in Mexico. So the idea of making, kind of running with a motif of sombreros and tacos and having Pedro there on the signs became a thing. So as you can imagine, in modern times, people looking at this not being too pleased.
Yeah.
One of the articles I read used a word that is not a real word, Latinx or Latinx. 10x. I'm not sure what it is. It's not a real word.
Lot to Roman numeral 10.
Yeah, something like that. I refuse. I don't think I'd be able to pronounce it correctly anyway, but I refuse to. So something that was very interesting I found out about Mr. Schaefer was just his background, some things that he did. So he was a Jewish person in a pretty predominant Baptist farming community. So he was in a minority position to start with, but he was also one of the first employers to regularly hire African Americans and other minorities, to the point that the Klan confronted him several times over his diversity and not
Wow.
hashtag diversity, actually real diversity, like going out there and putting, putting
he
his
was
money
just
where his
employing
mouth was.
people, and yeah.
So something a little bit interesting, a little bit of a twist on that. I look at it as kind of like the idea of I've been there just a couple times, and it's awful. Like, it's run down. It's everything bad about a motel and a tourist trap that I can think of. I do have a little bit of fond memories, I think, of the signs and being tormented by them as they drive around. I have a feeling Pedro's days are numbered. Apparently, through a couple articles I read, that some of the things I could see are pretty more stereotypical have been driven down. Some puns and things that Pedro would say have been removed.
Yeah.
But I'm also to be even handed. I can't think of any situation where I've seen Belgian Mongolian stereotypes. I haven't driven down the interstate and seen like a waffle and a yurt or anything like that. So if I was Mexican or Hispanic heritage, I could see that perhaps being offensive. But I've always thought of it as kind of playful and fun. I mean, it's not, you're not going to denigrate someone and try to incent them to come to your establishment. But
no, you're saying whatever. I mean, I guess it's probably not great, but it's also, I don't know, it was meant to be kind of a good, cool thing, but whatever. I'm not going to go there. But my thought was, I'm going to ask you somebody that's been there, because I enjoyed the signs. I thought they were delightful. I knew there was no way we were going to stop there. So it wasn't even like I wasn't even going to ask, but I just remember it's almost like, did they almost go a little too hard on the billboards and like blow their wad there? And like you get there and it's like, I mean, there's no guy dressed up as Pedro. It's just like you can grab some tacos.
They knew what they were doing. I think you provoke a bunch of kids to want to ask their parents to stop there. You get there, there's a bunch of like just junk that you could buy. You could buy that bumper sticker. You could buy some knickknacks that probably don't cost everything. It's probably a genius move on his part.
Actually, because nobody could go to Yelp or travel blogs or whatever, Expedia or something and go, don't go here.
And what else are you going to advertise all up and down 95? There's no business that that makes sense for. So it's a pretty unique situation, I think, for him.
I know I'm full of stories tonight, but I have to tell one more. I'll be as brief as I can here, but it's just, you're bringing back so many memories. We drove down when I was 13, because I remember, I was 13. We drove down to Disney World. So I know my parents wouldn't let me stop at south of the border. Well, we drove to Disney World in the minivan, the wood paneled, Voyager. And so this involves Holiday Inn, but we would never stay at a Holiday Inn. It was too expensive. The only time I went to a Holiday Inn was because the minivan broke down in Florida, which, I mean, that's one of the more depressing moments. It's one of the more depressing sentences I've ever said, but it's actually, those minivans nobody like traded that in. It just broke down, and it just, eventually you're like, we got to scrap this thing. So it broke down, kind of worst case scenario. We had to go get it towed, and we happened to be near a Holiday Inn while the shop was looking at it. And we went to the Holiday Inn, and my mom made a plea to the manager of the Holiday Inn. Can my kids use your pool? We're on vacation. We're going to be stuck here for however many hours, maybe overnight. And they said, absolutely not. Your filthy kids may not get in our pool, which in hindsight, actually, I don't know. I was upset. We were all sad. My mom, my mom, she didn't take it great. Put a little damper on the day. Wasn't too thrilled with it. And what I remember next is that the minivan got fixed. We somehow made it. And on the way to Disney World, it was the epic moment when one of my sisters, Rachel, traded our cat Fluffy to my sister Amanda for a Game Boy. And that's how that story ends. But Holiday Inn, I guess if you could afford to stay there, was amazing. But yeah, this whole idea of seeing all those signs the whole way, driving down to Disney World, it really takes you back to another time, which had some good moments. Again, it's like the two sides of the coin. It's like nostalgic, but it's also probably wasn't fun for my parents. Actually, I know it wasn't. So anyway, sorry, bring us back up. That was depressing.
So no, I think that was a good story. I think that your sister made a good trade. And I won't say who won out on that, which sister did. But just to kind of finish up, motels started with the concept of being catering to the new community of automobile drivers. Their relevance peaked in the early 1960s and declined with the creation of the Federal Interstate system. We still see vestiges of hotels today, but one of the reasons they seem older, run down, is because they were built in another era, designated to serve a community they can't really serve anymore. And Holiday Inn, shame on you. I don't think my buddy Kemmons Wilson would be happy with that. I'll have to, hopefully, if you see a ghost with a big smile and a Holiday Inn sign floating around your room tonight, it might be a good thing. He might be coming back to make things right with you, but in a good way.
That was fascinating. And one thing I'm going to take away from this one is, why is it that we want the uniformity in the hotels, but not in the restaurants necessarily? It's interesting, right? I don't know. I'll have to ponder that.
And I'll have a graham cracker tonight and think about that.
Yes, please do, for everyone's sake. All right. Well, hey, thank you all for listening to and watching Origin of Speakcies. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/Speakcies and becoming a Speakcies Supporter, which unlocks bonus content like Speakcies Uncut, Cringe Watch, and True Facts with Robert Banquette. You can get all those episodes. Also, you can visit our TeePublic store by going to speaksies.com/store. A couple of new shirts just dropped, including the all-purpose virtue signaling shirt, which I think you're going to like a lot. Steve mentioned earlier. Once again, thank you very much for listening. Bob's your uncle, and that's what I'm talking about.
Watch out for bears and kale is from the devil.
Speakcies.